everyone. Thanks so much for joining us for the special webinar we're doing with our friends from Nori to discuss their recently released carbon removal blended ton white paper. If you haven't already, feel free to introduce yourself in the chat. Tell us where you're joining us from and what you do. I'm Mega. I'm an OpenAir member based in London, and I work on policy and market development. Okay, quick bit of background on OpenAir. So we are a distributed volunteer network dedicated to the advancement of carbon dioxide removal solutions, which are essential to solving the climate crisis. And our growing global community collaborates on shared open source missions in the areas of policy, innovation, communications, and CDR market development. Toby will put some links to our website and to our Twitter in the chat, so please follow along and join us there if you haven't already. As usual, our quick housekeeping notes. So we're going to start with a quick presentation, followed by a few prepared questions, and then we will have moderated audience Q&A. So please type any questions you have into the Q&A box on Zoom as we go along. It's separate from the chat box, so make sure that you find the correct one. And we're also recording the event, so we can send that video link to everyone who registered, as well as post it to OpenAir's website and YouTube channel. Okay, so now for the main event. So we have our two panelists, or two presenters, Radhika and Rick today. Radhika Moolgavkar leads the supply and methodology group at Nori, where she's responsible for operationalizing supply into the Nori marketplace and developing new methodologies. Prior to Nori, she led the battery electric bus program at King County Metro. Rick Berg serves as the methodology R&D lead at Nori, specializing in the development of novel methodologies and the evaluation of CDR methods. Prior to joining Nori, he led the weather data science team at the Climate Corporation. So to our presenters, whenever you're ready, over to you.
All right, I'm just getting my screen shared and I'll get started. So thanks so much for having us. We're really excited to present our blended ton. So I'll start with a little bit of history about Nori, where we were and where we're going, and then turn it over to Rick, who will talk a little bit about the methodology and the science that we are thinking about. So so where we are, we started as a soil NRT company, and what an NRT is, a Nori removal ton, or our version of a carbon removal credit. Nori launched in 2017, so we're one of the earliest people or companies that really focused on carbon removal. The founders were prescient in realizing that carbon removal would be necessary to really meet our global targets to reduce carbon dioxide and prevent the worst of global warming. We raised our first seed funding in 2020, and that was about the time I was hired. So we really had a lot of history in the carbon removal marketplaces, and we're somewhat unique in that we have a real intersection between suppliers and buyers. We work directly with farmers right now, and we work directly with all sorts of buyers. And the goal of Nori at the time was to facilitate price discovery and remove barriers to an efficient carbon removal marketplace. So the things that we did a little bit differently, where we didn't embrace the notion of additionality in the traditional way at all. And we also chose soil because of its ex-post crediting. And it was mainly a response to some of the issues around forestry, and also because nobody else was working in soil, but the technology was really well understood. There were farmers who were already participating. And I think at the time, everybody really was very exuberant about the ability of soil to absorb carbon. So we currently work with farmers and Bayer Crop Sciences to model soil organic carbon. We create NRTs, and then another interesting thing about Nori is we write it to the blockchain. So we've always been a blockchain company. The reason we do that is for transparency and double accounting, and when they're sold, they're retired upon sale. But I think, as everybody knows, there are issues with soil carbon in some ways. So for a long time, there was the idea that a ton was a ton was a ton, and that has since been sort of rethought. And really, there are different types of carbon removal. And so for most people, they think about carbon removal as either soil or DAC or blue carbon. But really what Nori is pivoting to is thinking about carbon as two different larger buckets, the fast carbon cycle and the slow carbon cycle. And that's because we think that these are the best categories to really think about reversal risk, permanence, even additionality. So the fast carbon cycle are things that where eventually they're sort of human lifetime scale when carbon will be in flux. So you can think about things like soil, forests, certain types of blue carbon, maybe all types of blue carbon probably. And then the slow carbon cycle are those where there's geological storage. So it's civilization kind of timeframes for how long carbon is stored. And those are obviously things like DAC, types of ocean carbon, and mineralization, weatherization. And really, our viewpoint is that both of these things are needed to really scale carbon removal as an industry, but also prevent the worst outcomes of climate change. And they both have benefits and also negatives. So, you know, fast carbon obviously doesn't have the permanence that people want for carbon removal. However, it does have immediacy. You know, soil carbon, forest carbon are available. They're understood now. They can scale fairly rapidly, and they have some very significant ecosystem benefits that other types of carbon removal don't. So especially in soil, you'll have water retention, soil health, diversity it brings through crop rotations and things like that. And then obviously the benefits of slow carbon are they are permanent. They really do get rid of the emission in a way that fast carbon cannot, but they're not available today, and they are not also inexpensive. So there's a trade-off between both. So because of this, both because of the headwinds for soil and, you know, people's concern about its permanency, the concerns about the measurement and reporting around soil, which I can go into more detail if people have questions about, Nori has come out with this new product called the blended ton. And so the blended ton is really this idea of creating two different types, or taking two different types of fast and slow carbon and creating it into a single ton. So we are CDR agnostic, even though we launched in soil. So this answers one of our longstanding goals, which is to bring on other types of methodologies. It's a system that we think is both flexible and transparent as it grows. When we launch, we will be doing, won't have as much flexibility because we'll be trying things out. But the long-term goal is that buyers will be able to sort of choose and mix and match to meet their requirements as more supply comes online, and also as, prices and things come down. And really, it answers the biggest question that we've been facing as a company, which is equating slow and fast carbon. As I said, for a long time, people thought a ton was a ton was a ton. And then people thought about ton-year accounting, which wasn't very well received. There's been thoughts around a discount factor, but we thought the blended ton was like the most elegant solution to this. So basically what a blended ton is, it's taking what we think of as a portfolio approach to the single ton. So I'm sure many of the listeners are familiar that a lot of buyers of CDR will buy a mixture of different types of CDR to alleviate the risk, sort of like a mutual fund perspective. So what we are doing is we're taking that and trying to reduce the risk for a single ton. And we will overlap our carbon removal credit, the NRT, which has 10 years of permanence, with some sort of slow carbon credit, which could be DAC, could be mineralization, could be a whole host of things. And the idea being that that overlap prevents there from being some of the risk associated with delivery of the slow carbon credit and just provides more value to the buyer. It's net zero compliant today. So you could today as a buyer say, I am meeting my net zero requirements. And it allows accessibility because we believe that, smaller companies or companies without ESG, they don't have the time and the resources to do the type of work a Microsoft does. And so this allows them the ability to participate in the carbon removal marketplaces without having to invest a lot of effort on their side and let them focus on their, core businesses. With that, I'll turn it over to Rick, who will tell us a little about the methodologies.
Great, thank you. And yes, I'll be talking about a little bit more about the technical aspects of this, but put a little bit of context around it. As we all are very aware of, the carbon markets are always evolving. They're currently evolving, and the blended ton, I think, really reflects that. And kind kind of at the high level, what this evolution is looking like is very well embodied in the Oxford principles. We all know we need to cut emissions first, absolutely. And if there is any offsetting being done regularly, revise that strategy. Where the blended ton is reflected in this is this one. Number two, the shift to carbon removal and the shift to long-lived storage of the removals. And then the fourth one that Oxford has down here is supporting the development of net zero aligned offsetting. And of course, that may evolve in the future as well. What this looks like in the next slide here, there's a conceptual diagram that they put together. And in the blue, you can see the carbon removal pieces of this. So the light blue is the short-lived storage, and the dark blue is the long-lived storage for carbon removal. And this graph represents the percent of an offset portfolio through time. And you can see through time, really, the practicalities of this as the long-term storage becomes available in the market, the percentage of the portfolio increases for that. And so that's what the blended ton is really reflecting. It's this sort of this transition stage from where we have a lot of short-lived storage available, and in the future we expect to have a lot of long-lived storage available, and the blended ton combines the two to create kind of a full credit that is available now and lasts on the geologic kind of time scale. So going to the next slide, I can go through some of the qualities, the characteristics of the two credits that are involved here. The first one, the fast carbon cycle credit, the Nori removal ton, which we've just called NRT. So this is an ex post credit, so meaning the carbon is in the ground at the time of issuance. It's a transparent methodology. Nori really values transparency, and all of our methodologies are published and will be published in the future and available for comment and so on. The NRT is very conservatively quantified and issued. On average, the amount that is after getting through our methodology, it reduces the raw quantification values by 40 or 50%. Third-party verified, so we have a third-party verification of the practices that the farmers are doing. And there's a defined storage duration. For the NRT, that's 10 years minimum. All of the growers that are signed up to be suppliers through Nori agree to a 10-year contract. And there is reversal protection for that. So Nori guarantees if there is a reversal for whatever reason during that 10-year period, then the NRT will be replaced with a new one. And so on the next one, we go through the qualities of what we expect for the slow carbon cycle credits, which could come from a variety of sources. Like Radhika mentioned, this could be DAC, and when MRV gets in place, it could be enhanced weathering or some of the ocean methods and so on. And here for the qualities of this, you really see kind of the usual suspects here. So real, so upon delivery, the slow carbon cycle credit will be ex post, although they're not available yet. Sustainability is important for these things. So having environmental safeguards and community engagement is going to be critical for any project for us to be able to issue credits for that. Quantified, of course, conservative quantification against baseline, third-party verified, unique. So Nori employs a blockchain to track all of the issuances and retirements to ensure no double counting, and additionality to ensure positive effect, and permanency for these slow cycle credits. Having that long-term reversal risk minimized is critical as well. And exactly what that permanency looks like is to be determined. There's a lot of debate around whether that should be 100 years, whether that should be 1,000 years, what that should be. And we'll need to discuss that as well and figure out how that might work for those methods that are kind of in the gray area there, like some of the ocean methods or biochar and such. And so I will hand it off to Radhika for the last slide here on next steps.
Yeah, so next steps for us, which I mean, obviously the devil now is really in the details. We have this high level concept, and what we are working on right now is really the legal piece of this. So what does it mean to deliver a product that has some delivery now, some delivery later? Are there risks around creating a security? What type of asset are we creating? So really making sure that we stay within a forwards contract side of kind of perspective versus a futures kind of perspective. We're also working through the regulatory piece, which I am broadly including the risk of delivery. So there are risks for buyers, right, who are committing to purchase a product that may or may not deliver, and how and what they provide to Nori in terms of payment and what the expectation around that has to be worked out. And then there's, of course, the piece on the supplier side, which is they are creating products. They need, CDR is a young industry, and these are a lot of startups that we would likely be working with. And so how do you make sure that you provide enough money or enough guarantees that they can really get the type of financing they need to scale? So I think that will involve working through things like insurance and working with different types of banking. So Nori won't be doing that, but Nori will be kind of the facilitator of those pieces. And finally, under regulatory, it's like really thinking about the different standards bodies, how they interact with net zero, what their requirements are, and there are always new ones popping up. We've been talking to a group called eLiability recently, who has a very different perspective from carbon accounting than we've seen in the past. So really figuring out how to align with the different standards moving forward. The other piece will be a proof of concept. So we have a potential partner lined up. And so we want to develop a product that we can sell. It'll be a very limited number of tons, but it really just shows that there's both a market for it and we can deliver it, and show how our transparency will work, how people can track delivery, all those things. And then finally, we do have feedback. As Rick mentioned, transparency is really one of the hallmarks of Nori. It's why we are on the blockchain. We really believe in open source and getting feedback. And so we do have a GitHub out there that people should feel free to comment on after they've read the paper or listened to this presentation or anything. We are really open and hope to get lots of feedback. It's been open for about 4 or 5 weeks, and it'll be open basically till the end of the month, so that we can then start kind of moving on to the next steps of developing this concept. And with that, I will stop sharing and turn it back over to you both.
Thank you very much, Radhika and Rick. And everyone, hi, Toby Bryce, based in Brooklyn, New York. And we have a few prepared questions from OpenAir, and we'll spend 10 or 15 minutes on those, and then we'll leave plenty of time for audience Q&A. So please, we got a few great questions already coming in, but please put those in the Zoom Q&A box and not in the chat, because there's lots of stuff happening in the chat and we can't organize the questions unless they're in the Zoom Q&A box. But great presentation, and I just want to compliment you both and Nori for this initiative. I think it's much needed. I think it shows a lot of thought. I know you've been thinking about this for a long time, so I really appreciate that you guys have put this out there. And I think that it's a really important concept and something that I think has a lot of opportunity for the sector. So nice work. Wanted to go to, you mentioned the GitHub. We're at OpenAir, we're huge fans of open source, just as you are, Nori, and we were super excited to see you post this on GitHub. We post things on GitHub. And how's that process going? Have you gotten a lot of feedback? Like, what kind of feedback have you gotten? And again, I guess you said it's open for comment through July 31st.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I can take that one. So yeah, again, we really value transparency, and we appreciate all comments and questions. We would love to get more in the GitHub. We've gotten most comments directly through individual conversations. and a range of questions around governance, which we're working through, some about the standards that we mentioned in the white paper, and so on. And for example, the question about the standards was, are we going to plan to require certification by any given standards body, essentially, which we don't plan on doing. We're planning on publishing the criteria that we'll be using in this same kind of open sourced way as the white paper. But again, we would love more comments. The GitHub link is in the slide deck, or you can just search for it and find it on our website.
Excellent. Yeah, and we put it actually twice in the chat, so anyone can go in the chat and click on that and bookmark that page. And yeah, I plan to submit some comments, and I think that it's really great to be open like this, and I feel like crowdsourcing people's ideas will be interesting to see what comes back. Okay, so here's a question, and I pose this in a friendly way, not an aggro way, but there is a sentiment out in the world, or there's some questions out in the sort of science community and the carbon removal community about the carbon removal value of regenerative agriculture and soil carbon. And I don't think there are any questions about the validity of regenerative agriculture more generally, that it delivers agronomic benefits, ecosystem co-benefits, but I think there are some questions about what is the actual net carbon removal benefit. And so I put a link in the chat to our friend Robert Hoagland's recent blog post that kind of is a summation of the literature questioning whether soil carbon is a carbon removal method, and would love to hear, and because soil carbon currently at least is the front end of the NRT, it's important for the front end of the NRT. So what would you say, and obviously this can be a longer conversation, but what are some of the points that you would make in response to these assertions? Because there's kind of a debate out there.
Yes, absolutely. So, and that was a good blog post. I liked it, pointed out a lot of the open questions out there. And as was apparent through that and through other discussions out there, soil science is always advancing. It's currently advancing. There's still uncertainties, as you would expect for any kind of open system that you're trying to study. We wrote a blog post earlier this year about some of the challenges as well. We can provide a link for that. That we can, I'm not sure where we would put that, but we'll find a way. But science is finding there are variations in the specifics of how carbon is stored through regenerative agricultural practices, effects in various soil types and climates at different depths over different time horizons and so on. And Nori's addressing that uncertainty in a few ways. So first, I mentioned before, the quantification of the NRT is highly conservative. So between 40 to 50% reduction typically through from the raw quantification values after it gets through our methodology. And we're also directly supporting research groups that are investing in investigating measurement methods and how the market can potentially scale and incentivize these practices in various ways. That measurement is very important through all of this. And there's a wide range of organizations out there that are working on different innovative ways to measure and quantify and estimate the organic carbon stored in soils. So I think certainly there's uncertainties where we adjust for those uncertainties, and we're also investing directly into reducing those uncertainties in the future. And overall, by our estimates, soil carbon could potentially store a few gigatons per year of carbon in the soils for at least a few decades. And I think with the scale of the challenge we're facing, that we really should be employing all of the methods out there, including soil carbon.
Anything to add, Radhika? You're on mute.
On mute?
No, you're not.
Oh, sorry. So I think Rick did a great job. I dropped in the BDM article blog post. He said, I mean, I think the other thing is, is that the science has been going multiple directions, as Rick said, and it's very specific. So I do think there are carbon removal benefits just at a high level, but the issue is more around the measurement of it. And that's why we're very, very conservative, and the depths and things like that. So we support carbon removal through soil. We want to support all types of carbon removal. And like Rick said, we want to invest in making it better. The federal government is also doing that. There was just an announcement of a new bill that's going to be part of the Farm Bill. And so I think what we see is that there is lots of momentum to make soil better. And Nori is going to be at the forefront of that conversation and being part of making sure that you can scale it in a way that is both beneficial to the farmers and is beneficial to the broader environmental movement and broader desire to bring down the carbon budget.
Excellent. I just pulled up, there's a Carbon 180 post about it's the $300 million of funding for better measurement of soil carbon, which is much needed, and which the Carbon Business Council called for, and a issue brief that Radhika helped put together. So it's really great to see that happening. And yeah, I think the other thing that I put a link also, this is a really important call for comment from the science-based targets on beyond value chain mitigation. And there's this idea that right now, given the stage of the carbon removal sector, that we really need to move away from thinking about making compensatory claims, meaning offsetting ton for ton on emissions. We need to decarbonize and reduce emissions as quickly as possible, figure out some sort of climate contribution budget, and then you're not like locked into this ton for ton accounting with your contribution. You can support novel carbon removal in any form that you choose. You can support biodiversity, which is very difficult to denominate in tons of carbon. You can support blue carbon, so I think that that's sort of an interesting idea, but I would encourage everyone in the audience to take a look at that link. It's a survey that it's due at the end of the month. It's actually very detailed. You don't have to answer every question, but I think that gives you an idea of some of the other ways of thinking about this besides being locked into making these compensatory claims at the early stage of development the carbon removal sector currently finds itself. Question about vintage. So when you sell a blended ton, I guess part of the point is that you can have a current year vintage and then be delivering long duration carbon removal via this mechanism. And you can buy all the carbon removal you want in 2030 and 2031 from any direct air capture company out there would be happy to sell you those tons. But if you want tons in 2023 or 2024, as you point out, they're very hard to find for any like high quality long duration carbon removal. So that's the vintage. Vintage is a really important concept. How is the pricing looking? Like it's still going to be pretty expensive, right? It's not like you're going to get you're not going to be in the, that sort of next gen $200 range necessarily. You're on mute again.
Because
yeah,
it says I'm not on mute. That's so funny. Now, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. So you're absolutely right, Toby. We are not going to be able to drive down the price right away. We are in the same boat as anybody who's purchasing from these suppliers, right? Obviously, it's chicken and egg. You got to scale to get the price down, and you've got to buy to get the price down. And so we are anticipating, our first partner, the price to be somewhere around $500 to $550 a ton, which is better than some, but more than others. And really our goal is to help scale it so it does drive pricing down more quickly. But I think as most people maybe feel, there's going to have to be multiple procurement methods to help the CDR industry really scale up and bring costs down. And this is the early days. And so unfortunately, we can't fully address the price point issue, which is why we're launching with this proof of concept idea to see if there are buyers who fit that sweet spot of, yes, we're very interested in carbon removal, but no, we don't have the time to do all the work. And we'll kind of let Nori guide us, but we want to do carbon removal. I think, the other thing I think is as regulations come out, particularly out of the EU, we're going to see companies and the states, right? Like even though SB 308 didn't pass in California, all of these things are going to start driving interest. And so.
To your bill. It's not dead yet.
2-year, right, 2-year bill. I mean, my point is I have faith that these things are going to come through, and before we know it, we're going to see the right mechanisms to want products like the blended ton for states and companies who may not be in the position to do all the legwork.
Yep. I'm going to put a link in the chat. You guys had a discussion with our friend Will Burns a couple weeks ago, and I spelled his name correctly. Good. And you talked about, so you mentioned that Nori sort of notionally carbon removal agnostic, even though you've historically focused on soil. Is there an opportunity to create kind of, themed, for lack of a better word, blended ton? So maybe I'm going to package blue carbon with direct ocean removal or electrochemical ocean alkalinity enhancement. Is that on the roadmap? Because I think that would be super cool.
Yeah, that is something I've dreamed about since I started at Nori, and I started hearing about all the different types of carbon removal. On the roadmap is the ability to mix and batch, and we are going to definitely be considering things like, from a marketing perspective, maybe there are companies like Patagonia who are more interested in soil because they're on the land, or Hurley in California and they want to do oceans because they are tied to the oceans, whatever that may look like. So we want to think about those types of mixing and matching, but at the same time, providing the people who purchase it an understanding of the risk profile around that. So, purchasing DAC has a totally different risk profile from a reversal perspective than maybe purchasing an ocean's carbon, removal. So we want to also be able to provide our buyers that kind of knowledge so they can buy to within their risk tolerance, and also provide optionality if they have a lowered risk tolerance. What does that look like then for matching insurance and things like that to help mitigate that? So really the vision is to really create a very robust ability for buyers to choose what makes sense for them, both from what they're passionate about, but also from their different tolerance levels of things.
And speaking of podcasts, and I put these in the chat earlier, but just to make sure that for people who aren't paying attention to the chat, Radhika hosts the best podcast in carbon removal called the Carbon Removal Newsroom, and you probably already listened to it, but I just put a link in the chat. And Nori founder Ross Kenyon, who I believe, hello Ross, you're in the audience, hosts a podcast called Reversing Climate Change, which is also excellent. So I just wanted to encourage folks to follow those and listen to them wherever you listen to your podcasts. One other product question. So I started thinking when I was rereading the white paper, would this be too complicated to have sort of a portfolio blended ton, where you have a portfolio on the front end of short cycle carbon removal combined with a portfolio of the long, the long duration carbon removal? Or would that get too complicated? Do you understand what I'm saying? So you'd have you wouldn't just have one. Yeah.
With forestry, with something to create, mitigate the risk.
For diversity, yeah.
Yeah, I don't actually think that's too complicated. I think there are things we have to work out on the Nori end first, which are, one, developing the methodologies, but two, also identifying the suppliers of that type of carbon. We've been so deeply focused in soil for so long. So one of the things actually, and Rick and our team are going to work on in the next 6 months, is identifying other types of fast carbon suppliers, if you will. So ecosystem restoration around mangroves, that's like a very common one. Seagrass is another one, and figure out if there are ways to partner with them. And then I actually think your idea is great. Nobody's thought about that at Nori. So put it into the GitHub as a suggestion, because it answers some of the other questions we have had around fast carbon. And I think that would be a really interesting twist on what we've been thinking about.
Yeah, it would take some sort of software product development to make it work and make it usable from a buyer.
Right. But we have a product team who's already thinking about the mixing and matching. So this is just a different version of that, and so I think it's doable from a product perspective, but literally nobody had thought about that at Nori. So the whole point of the open paper is we want the ideas of the crowd to help us make it better.
Good. Well, everyone send your ideas to the GitHub. Okay, here's a little bit of a philosophical question, and I'm not sure it makes sense, but I'm going to ask it anyway. And I'm going to put a link to the chat to a write-up from Carbon Gap on quote unquote like for like, meaning the use of short cycle or biospheric carbon removal to offset biospheric carbon emissions, and the use of long cycle geospheric carbon removals to offset fossil carbon emissions, which are effectively, both of which should be effectively permanent. This blended ton, because it's kind of orthogonal to that concept, meaning it's not really related because you're blending the two. Do you have any, maybe I'll put this to Rick and then anything Radhika would want to add, but like, do you have any thoughts on that? Like, is this related to like for like, or are you just kind of, this is a different approach that's taking some of the same ideas and doing it a slightly different way?
Yeah, I think in general, it's a little bit different of a framework. And it's always hard kind of reconciling different frameworks. Like you mentioned, it's, orthogonal in a way, but I think in this case, it could be done. So like for like, it's a bit of a fuzzy concept in itself, but the dimension, the two buckets it typically splits into, the dimension it splits those on is typically durability, which loosely then translates into biospheric and geospheric storage. So thinking about the blended ton in that case, the blended ton is fundamentally a high durability product. So in that case, it could fit into this high durability bucket of like for like.
Yeah.
But if there is a like for like framework that explicitly requires biosphere for biosphere and geosphere to offset fossil emissions and so on, I think it's a little harder to reconcile them, except at kind of the higher level of kind of their goals, right? So with the geospheric side, you're trying to offset long term, and you are using those as they become available. Then on the biospheric side, the goal is to just continue incentivizing, these kinds of either carbon storage or ecosystem restoration as much as possible for as long as possible to just continue increasing that biospheric carbon stock. And so in that case, the goals of the two, I think, match up pretty well, where the blended ton could potentially hit those requirements and like for like, but really in that case, I would really need to see kind of a more detailed like for like mechanism to know exactly how it might fit in. But I think fundamentally they're certainly not in conflict with each other. They have the same goals.
Yep.
And so, whatever framework ends up being dominant in the CDR market in the future, I'm pretty confident that blended ton can fit in, and there's a place for both biospheric and geospheric kind of storage.
Agreed. Yeah. So I guess as you talk, so the blended ton is really solving for the supply issues with geospheric or long duration carbon removal. And you could always still, if the policy framework permits and allows and facilitates, you can still always offset your AFOLU, as I like to call them, land-based carbon emissions with soil carbon or forest carbon or blue carbon that's short cycle. So if that framework exists, that makes sense. One last quick question, and then we have a bunch of great audience questions, and we're going to flip over to those. And again, I asked this in a friendly and sympathetic way. Nori is strongly identified as a blockchain company. I believe a lot of people in carbon removal, blockchain has a little bit of a negative connotation. And Radhika and I are working on this on another front, but I would love to hear and like tell us like we're five without using like terminology. And from a functional perspective, and maybe use a blended ton as example, what does a distributed ledger or blockchain functionally do to facilitate a blended ton?
The idea under the blockchain, well, first of all, we are on Polygon, so we're a much less emitting type of blockchain technology than traditionally people think about it. So that's one detail I think is important. But two, it's really was designed to provide transparency. So anybody can look on our distributed ledger and get a sense. And we also, use it to track who is purchasing our carbon removal credits and who is creating our carbon removal credits. The other thing that was designed to do was prevent double accounting, because once you purchase a carbon removal credit on our system, it's retired and it cannot be resold or reused in any way. So that is the way that we are currently using blockchain. However, the technology has all sorts of other applications that would remove the friction from the general marketplaces, from suppliers, contracting could become easier. Underlying like procurement and traceability could become easier. It's still early days of the technology, but that's where we see it going, which is really to remove the friction around the delivery and creation of carbon removal credits that exist just from the manual processes that currently happen that can be alleviated through blockchain. So I know there's a lot of concern out there about it, but it can be used in a way that's both low emitting, based on the technology, and also based on the, you can also make sure that you're working with companies that are using clean energy, and also help with some really significant issues in scaling the carbon removal marketplaces. I don't know, Rick, if you wanted to add anything or if I covered.
No, I think that covered more than I know about blockchain, at least.
Yeah, I'll admit that I'm coming to this and this other project we're working on as a little bit of a skeptic, but I am coming around to the idea that maybe it's not necessary today to use this technology to do the things that Radhika was describing, and you wouldn't necessarily need blockchain there are ways to have transparency without blockchain, but as the sector scales, I'm coming around to the idea that like there is functional value and a lot of these things. So it's a great answer. Thank you for talking about that.
Yeah, and I do think, Toby, the one thing you can't do right now, which you can do on blockchain, is the double accounting piece, right? Like that is much harder to track than it is on blockchain, is my personal opinion, but I know
you could tokenize the same real world asset twice and still have double counting on blockchain.
Not the way we do. You can't. Anyway, won't go into the technical detail.
All right, thank you. And we have a bunch of audience questions, and Mega is gonna come on. Awesome. Thank you, guys.
Hey, yeah, we do have quite a few. So yeah, first one, I guess you talked a little bit about this portfolio idea Toby is submitting and kind of working with other slow cycle or fast cycle carbon credit providers. Can you just talk a little bit about how you would suggest procuring the slow cycle carbon credits? Different methodologies are out there, different, like within a pathway, there could be different providers doing it in slightly different ways, different MRVs. Yeah, how do you deal with all of that? And would you think it should be like kind of an RFP process, or is it more like this happens up front and you vet some suppliers and onboard them? Yeah, a lot of questions in there, but I will leave it to you.
To the methodological parts, but just to answer, we will be looking for partnerships with specific types of carbon removal suppliers. It's going to be methodology agnostic, but it'll need to meet methodological requirements that Rick will talk about. But, the biggest things that we will think about is their ability to scale, the likelihood they'll succeed, things that make sure that they are a good bet from a risk perspective. And then I think there was another part of the question that I've forgotten, but it won't be an RFP process, right? It'll be us partnering with them to make sure that we can work through all of the delivery issues that could come up. And so it'll be different than how Frontier and Stripe approached it. I think it'll be more one-on-one, us building relationships. And we do have, like I said, one partner lined up and a couple of good other conversations happening. So there's interest from the supplier side for that piece. And then I'll let Rick talk to the methodology piece.
Yeah, so with the methodologies, Nori develops its own methodologies. And we plan to do that in the future as well. So for any supplier that comes in, we'll be writing up a methodology along the same kind of transparent process in the same way that we publish the white paper and so on, to allow for expert review and public review and so on.
Okay, got it. And is that like, are you expecting that to kind of eventually come into sort of harmony with other methodologies out there, or where do you kind of see that side of it going, as hopefully there's a little more standardization in the market?
Yeah, that's a great question on where things are going. I think to a large degree, I think the developments in the compliance markets will drive some of it. It's essentially, if there is a lot of volume going on in the compliance market that gets developed. I think a lot of methodologies will converge to at least be compliant with those methodologies.
Okay, got it. And then just in terms of, you mentioned that it's net zero compliant, can you talk a little bit about how that fits into, you know, existing frameworks and yeah, just what you kind of specifically mean with net zero compliance?
Sure. So yeah, I'll let Radhika add to this as well, but there's several organizations out there that have various standards. And we're, you know, chatting with, you know, the E-Liability Institute is one that's just basic carbon accounting is really what is being pushed there. And there's others that, you know, we consider and we look at when we're writing up our own criteria as well.
Oh, you seem to be muted again, sorry.
I'm
Oh, no, good now.
It's just slow. It's like very laggy.
Yeah.
I would just say that we want to design a product that can flex as things become clearer. And one of the things I think everybody within the CDR industry acknowledges is that it's very hard right now to know which standard to follow, which ratings agency to do. And so we think of it as net zero compliant because we believe there's carbon removal today that continues for, you know, 100 years at least, probably 1,000 years in most situations. But that may change. And so the beauty sort of the blended ton is it gives us the flexibility to adjust the two pieces to meet whatever compliance is needed. So that is how we came to the resolution that it was net zero today. However, as we know, SBTI, Robert Hoagland are pushing different visions of this. And then, you know, we will have to adjust as we see where the market settles. But it seems like 3 months ago, there was one net zero definition, and today there's kind of a slightly different one.
Yeah, definitely. Okay, and then just thinking about the actual like NRT itself, you talked a little bit about the portfolio idea earlier, but is it the way that you're currently thinking about it? Is it's like one slow and one fast project, and then that blends into 1 ton, or is it like one sort of like portfolio of DAC and a portfolio of soils, and that blends together? Like, how many projects actually go into the underlying NRT?
Farmer or supplier. Okay. So the way it has worked traditionally is a farmer will enroll their farm in our system. They will then get a soil carbon credit that is associated with them. So that you could say, you know, Joe Brown's farm will be the NRT, and some DAC supplier will be the back end, and they'll be combined together.
Got it. Okay, so it's kind of like one of each project, and then you've got this. Okay, yeah. Cool. And then what does this mean for legacy NRTs? So the ones that have already been sold, does that kind of change the way they're valued or looked at, or how do they fit into the picture now?
We don't think that changes the value. They've all been paid for already, and they will continue to have the 10-year requirement. And so, and we will continue to also sell standalone NRTs for at least the time being, because we do believe that fundamentally they play a role in terms of, you know, being a bulwark against the worst outcomes of climate change, that they have value. So I don't think it changes the value of the old ones, and it shouldn't change the value of the standalone ones that will be continue to sell.
Got it. Okay. And then, yeah, just thinking about like integration. So people were asking about like integration with API, with registries and things. How does the blockchain aspect of it sort of integrate with registries? Because I think, as far as I know, they don't really have that sort of functionality.
Yeah, Rick, please add if I get this wrong, but right now, Nori is its own registry, if you will. We create our own methodologies. We don't work with the traditional standards bodies, and that, or not standards bodies, traditional registries. And that was a very deliberate decision made by the founders, because they were trying to bring more efficiency and speed up the process of carbon removal. And so I think and they don't integrate with our blockchain, but we don't really have plans to work with the traditional registries at this point, though we are always open to exploring it if it somehow makes sense in the future.
Okay, got it. Yeah, I wanted to ask actually about, you mentioned like this idea of sort of providing a guarantee. And I was wondering if this, now that I feel like you're thinking a little bit beyond just like selling a basic ton and thinking about blending it and thinking about things like insurance, have you kind of thought at all about like the insurance side of it? And is that something you guys would do? I know we had Kita on This is CDR a few weeks ago, who are great. Everyone should watch that episode as well. And I think that's kind of a first foray into insurance over here in Europe. Yeah, would that be like within your scope as well?
So we would not be an insurance provider. What we want to do is work with companies like Kita, and our new CEO, Matt, has also comes from a marketplace background and there are other people that he knows who have started getting interested in voluntary carbon markets and insuring them. So there are people out there, different groups who are thinking about this. So we'd want to partner with one of them. We really do not want to there are certain core expertise we have and certain expertise others have. What we think we can do is convene them in a meaningful way that allows buyers and suppliers the ability to have relatively frictionless purchasing and creation of carbon removal credits.
Okay, got it. And other than insurance, what other kind of partners or like aspects of the infrastructure industry do you think need to be there? So I know you guys have like the supplier partnerships, the registry, as it were, some of the, building methodologies and things in-house. Like, what are the other external bits of expertise and work that need to be put together?
Yeah, so I think directly related to the blended ton would be the financing piece. So the banking piece, what does it look like to, help suppliers do the capital, create the right type of structure so they can get the capital funding, maybe even having relationships that allow them access to certain types of banks. We wouldn't again do it. We would just be sort of a facilitator. So those are like the two big pieces within like the direct ecosystem. I think then in the broader ecosystem, it's really thinking about the policy piece. Like we're very interested in thinking about how to drive procurement, how to create a basic floor. It'll be working with the standards bodies and how to integrate with them. And so those, while not exactly relevant to the sale of the blended ton, they're all part of the success of the broader blended ton and I think the industry generally.
Okay. And what about like auditing or verification? I'm guessing.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. Do
Yeah,
you have like third-party partners on that already?
We don't yet. We do for soil because we've been doing third-party verification, but that will be part of the methodological development that Rick has. So the MRV will be just sort of inherent in any methodology we choose.
Okay, got it. Maybe one or two more before we go. Yeah, just on those methodologies. So as you develop those, are they things that you kind of like publish and you're hoping get adopted more widely, or, is that something that you put out into the world, or is that more proprietary?
I can take that one. So the methodologies, we're really going to be developing them for use at Nori, but they will be completely open. They will be totally transparent, and the development process will also be transparent as we work on those. So in a similar way to the white paper that we ask for comments and so on, expect the methodologies we developed will also be open, and they'll be there for anybody to read, of course. But they're not really designed for, to be the single standard in industry. Although if that does happen, that'd be great.
Yeah, I mean, I'm always interested in how, if it's going to be standardized. And I think part of it is like bottom up, where different methodologies are coming out, and some of those things are going to be adopted more widely, and some will come top down and everyone will have to adapt to it. But I think like having more good examples of methodologies out in the world is a good thing, probably. Yeah,
I've read a lot of methodologies, and there is a lot of overlap between methodologies in general. So I think it could be done. It's certainly not an impossible task to create a single standard for these, for the most part. And
overlap sounds promising, right? That's like consensus might happen. Okay. And just before we go, like, how can people keep up on, all these things you're talking about that are coming out? I know we put in links to the current sort of consultation, but anything else that people should keep an eye out?
We have 2 different podcasts at Nori, so as appropriate, we will talk about Nori related issues on those. So if you have that, also we will be periodically publishing updates or new versions of the white paper as we get some of this other stuff figured out. So, those will publicize and through our different social media and on our website. So I think those are the 2 best places to keep track of it. And, if people have questions and the GitHub's done, they can always email hello@nori.com, and that also will flow into my inbox at some point. So, yeah.
Perfect. All right. Thank you guys so much for joining us. This has been really great. And yeah, please, everyone, check out those links that Toby's been dropping in if you want to keep up on more of that. Yeah, just quick notes on what's coming next. So July 24th, which I believe is this coming Monday, carbon removal in the Hudson Valley. So if you're out in the East Coast of the US, I think please check that out, or anyone. That'll be 11 a.m. Eastern. And then on This is CDR, so that's on Tuesdays, we have Dr. Holly Jean Buck coming up on the 25th. And then some others, which Toby, I think you need to put the screen back on for me to recommend. But anyway, Toby's putting in the Eventbrite. We have August 1st, we have Carba. August 8th, we have Aquatic again, giving us an update. The 22nd, Octavia Carbon, who are awesome, out of Kenya. The 29th, Crew Carbon, and then September 5th, Seaworthy. And Toby, sorry for making you run the chat as well as the links, but I think Toby's putting in an Eventbrite link to our kind of upcoming few webinars and things, but if not, you can find them on Eventbrite by looking for OpenAir's channel. I just put in the one to the Hudson River one. Great. Thank you guys all for joining us, and we'll see you next time.